Welcome to the Workforce Advantage, where thought leaders and innovators shape the workforce of tomorrow.
The semiconductor industry is booming, but finding the right talent can be a significant hurdle. Luckily, with the right approach, it doesn't have to be an obstacle. Hi, I'm your host, Tim Dupree. In this episode of The Workforce Advantage, we're exploring how Kelly leverages over 20 years of semiconductor expertise to solve one of the industry's biggest challenges: hiring, training, and deploying skilled technical talent. Joining us today is Craig Walters, Vice President of Operations at Kelly. Craig will share insights on how Kelly creates career pathways that make the industry more accessible, breaking down barriers for individuals without advanced degrees but with high potential. Listen in and learn how Kelly is driving growth in the semiconductor sector by building a more inclusive and skilled workforce. Hi, Greg. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tim, for having me today. I appreciate it very much.
You bet. You bet. So can you start by sharing a little bit about your role and journey at Kelly?
Sure. I started in early 2018 as an ops manager at a large semiconductor site. At the time, it was a fairly small organization. There were a lot of IP barriers, in the environment. Managed approach was new to the client, and we were basically doing a lot of what we consider level one operation type work, right? Manual wafer movement, some gas bottle changes, things like that, but pretty much all level one type background work. It wasn't shortly after that we were able to bridge and get into level two work, which is basically now you're, behind the lockout tagout barriers, you're actually doing maintenance on the tools, you're doing more complicated tasks. And it was a huge transition for us because it just accelerated from there, right? A lot of cases, we were supplementing the workforce at the site, but in some cases we had standalone operations where it was a full Kelly workforce in that functional area for that maybe certain tool set.
Yeah, thanks for that overview. So you've seen a lot, needless to say. I want to get in today's topic. So the semiconductor industry is experiencing a significant amount of growth. Finding the right talent remains still a significant challenge. What specific talent gaps do you think semiconductor companies face today?
I mean, it's just really, if you look at, I know there's a lot of studies out there saying, from an engineering standpoint, a lot of shortfalls depending on how you look at what the schools are outputting versus projected what's needed. But today, obviously, we're focusing more on the technicians, and that's probably even more impactful in a sense that is, a lot of the systems to develop technicians has been minimized over the last decade or longer. And, the workforce really doesn't exist in the sense of what they're looking for today for a plug and play. So there's a massive effort underway. A lot of schools are trying to gear up to look at how they can introduce, recent high school graduates into this workforce, maybe people that don't necessarily want to go to college, but are looking for something else, a true career path. Some of these are doing okay. It's going to take a while to get this big old ball moving in the right direction to where it's outputting and giving, because the geographic locations of the semiconductor industry has expanded dramatically over the last few years in where it's located in the domestic United States, right? And we're seeing communities that have never had a presence from a large company come in, and it creates new challenges because the workforce that does exist there local is not necessarily, where they need to be able to be successful in this space.
Yeah, so it sounds like you've had to do a significant amount of work with your team on building the workforce that these semiconductor companies need. We have 2 decades of experience providing these solutions. How has this expertise shaped your approach and your team's approach to hiring, training, and deploying talent?
I think if you look at, for instance, a lot of it starts with our own ecosystem, right? That we develop at the major manufacturing sites, making sure it's not just the technicians, but the managers we put in place. The managers we put in place are homegrown, and we're really proud of that, right? I mean, that's one of those things where we're truly creating a pipeline, an internal pipeline, an external pipeline, but an internal pipeline that builds managers for the next iterations or maybe the next hotspots. So it gives them opportunities that they didn't have before. But as far as getting the technicians in there, we have evolved dramatically, over time. We have our own recruiting staff that does nothing but technicians for the semiconductor space. So they're very well tuned in what they're looking for. Their screening methodology has changed dramatically, how they, interview. And then when it gets to the interview process with our own managers, again, we've created basically little tests, to look at people's technical aptitude, their problem solving ability, and so forth. Now, we're not expecting them to come in and necessarily understand vacuum and RF, the things they will need to understand. But basically, do they have the building blocks to come into something bigger? And a lot of what we look at too is it's not just filling, lack of for better term, butts and seats, but looking at how we can build, whoever we're bringing in into future roles, right? So they have a path, a career path, and we're constantly preaching that. And it's huge for us in really going out there and sourcing the people we know that are going to be successful in this environment.
I love that because a number of our clients have asked us, what are we doing to build the workforce of tomorrow, reskill them, build new skills? And by bringing them in and skilling them up and reskilling them, I think it really demonstrates our commitment to building that workforce of tomorrow. But when you think about the other needs that Semiconductor has, they also have needs for specialized skills. So how does Kelly ensure that new hires are equipped with the right skills through training and development programs?
You hit on it right there. It's the training and the development programs that we've created from the very start, right? So we have, again, copying from our own experience in the industry and stuff like that, we created our own, what we call NEO class, new employee orientation, right? And it's a class that everybody goes through no matter which customer we're working with. Now we tailor them for the different sites, but it is something that we bring them in. They, not only for their new employee orientation that's done on the customer's behest, but also our own internal. It starts there. And then again, we look at what the customer needs are. Do we need, to make sure, the basic, OSHA standards, right? So the OSHA certifications, do they need breathing air certification? Do they need lockout, tagout, and so forth? There's so many different variances, and it depends on the programs we're bringing in. If it's just, going in and basically manually moving reticles in a factory, or if it's manually moving wafers because maybe the automatic, handling system's down, or they're doing, it's a new site. It's the stepped function. So you bring them in, somebody doesn't have experience, you bring them into a level 1 operation. They're learning how to clean parts. They're learning, and when I say cleaning parts, it's not a giant dishwasher. These are stainless/ceramic quartz parts, and they're very expensive, and they have multiple uses in most cases. So that's a good starting place where they can come in and learn the environment. And as they do that, then they can start prepping for some of the PMs, the preventative maintenance that's done on these tools, and they slowly get introduced in that. And then as we have opportunities to move them into a level 2 position, or potentially other, maybe they're showing signs of, this is going to be a manager in the making. We have our own internal courses, again, that we internally pipeline these folks to get them ready for tomorrow's needs, basically.
I love the career pathway topic that we're talking about, and I want to get into that in just a minute. But first, I'd like to discuss some of the key barriers that prevent people from entering the semiconductor industry to begin with. How does Kelly help remove them?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the big ones, right? The big fab operators in the United States right now, and if you look at what they're looking for to get a technician in, they're looking for experience and they're looking for education. And in a lot of cases, yes, it's nice to have, I'm not diminishing that, but it's not necessarily everything. And what I mean by that is, I'll give an example of a case where it was probably early 2018 in the location we were for a large semiconductor factory. We had an employee, or a future employee, come in and do an interview. The bicycle shop he was working at, younger man, had closed, but he had very good, strong technical aptitude, came in and very well done on his interview process. And he goes, "Hey, listen, I've got a couple other buddies, same thing. They were working with me. they're looking for jobs. So we interviewed them. All three of them were hired. And on top of that, one of them has gone on to work. Now, actually, two of them work for the customer directly as technicians, but one of them's gone into management on the customer side. It's one of those things where we're able to go and bridge that gap because we're looking for people that we can get the experience, right? So once they get the 6 months, 8 months, a year, 2 years under their belt, it makes them much more, wanted in a sense in that environment. And that's where we get a lot of customer hires. I mean, if you look at, I think since we've really been tracking since 2019, we have, and I say lost in a good way, about 2,000 technicians to either the customer, field service technicians roles for some of the suppliers. Some of them have even gone to medical device makers because, again, it's a very like operation. And so it's massive what we've been able to do. And that's how we know our model works, right? Because we're constantly being asked if we can transfer this employee, if they can come work for that kind of thing. And so we just continually backfill and feed into that.
I love your example of the bicycle shop repair person who didn't have the advanced degree but found his way in. It's a great example. So when I think of the industry, it is very complex. You mentioned some expensive equipment, expensive wafers that are moving around the sites. And so I imagine collaboration is absolutely critical. How does Kelly work with clients to understand their specific needs and then ultimately tailor the workforce solution appropriately?
I think, again, it's the big thing. It's making sure that we have a good partnership, obviously, because it is a win-win if it's done correctly. And what I mean by that is we're bringing in very green talent. We're getting them the experience. We're basically vetting them to see if this is an environment they want to work in, they can continue to work in. And we're showcasing their talent to the customer in a sense that allows us to, build future relations, right? And a lot of, every factory, even within the same company, they, from site to site, they can operate very differently. And so we have to go in and really sort of understand what are the needs and sort of backwards build it in essentially, right? And then showcase what we're able to bring to it because we're not just filling butts and seats. Again, we're looking at these are people that are going to help not only do the work they're supposed to be doing, in these 12-hour shifts in most cases, but also systems improvements, right? Because they're the eyes on the floor. They're the ones that are doing the work. How can we go and better the systems that are on, and give input to the customer on maybe things that could be changed that, again, help the overall operations, because the process flows, the equipment, everything's a little different from site to site. And so we have to really sort of make sure that we're part of the solution, not just a machine that's bringing new people in. And what again, sort of saying that is we do have technical managers. And so they're able to be involved in what we consider, A3, problem solving type methodology, going in and looking at maybe there's a quality issue, maybe there's a safety issue. How can we go and help maybe even engineer that out, right? What are certain things we can do to make this so it doesn't happen again? And these are things we do share openly, obviously, with the customer because it's huge to show that we're wanting to make the workplace a better place. We're wanting to make their factory run at the output that they need to make their customer commits. So the partnership's huge.
So I'm assuming it has to be when you've got a collaborative partnership, it's about not just bringing in the talent, but retaining them. And retaining them is just as important as bringing in new talent. So let's talk about that for a minute. What strategies does Kelly use to improve retention rates in the semiconductor space?
I think, again, it's one of those things, it's managers on site, managers present. And, this is not a call it in from home type operation or work, right? And, most of these factories run 24/7. And so we make sure that we have the ecosystem to support that again, right? And our managers, they don't work 24/7. We're not that way, but in the sense of that, they're able to skew and make sure that they have a presence amongst all the shifts, all the technicians, because you have to continually get the message in front of them. They have to understand that there is a focus on safety, there's a focus on quality, and there's a focus on development, their own internal development, right? So making sure those relationships are strong, that the technicians know exactly what needs to happen, what they're doing. That's huge. That helps with retention, right? Because they have that outlet to be able to, if they have an issue, something like that, they know who to go to. The other part of it is we're growing this talent local. And that's huge too. I'm not looking at bringing necessarily talent in from out of state. Now, we may transfer managers as they develop and there's opportunities that present themselves if they want to go to a certain region. But locally, I want to go and develop this talent from within. And because that, again, from a retention standpoint, a lot of these folks, these younger adults want to stay in this, maybe want to stay in this place, right? And so we're able to go and accommodate that and really go and look at how we can start building that pipeline, to get those new employees in and make sure that, the retention is there. The other big part of it is our contracts and how we look at our contracts. And what I mean by that is if we're supposed to have 10 technicians on a certain shift in a certain functional area, then that's what we have. We make sure we hit that we started tracking this really, really heavily during COVID because it became a lot of our management from the sites left. We were still there. And so we had to have some sort of system to show that, hey, listen, we're still making sure we're filling the contract headcount. And so we track that very, very tightly. We use utilization tools to make sure that, again, our technicians are being utilized 100% when they're in the work environment, right? And if they're not, what are other things we can take on to make sure that we have that? Or do we need to cross-train in other functional areas to help support that?
So you're hitting on exactly where I wanted to go next, and that's making sure we have a successful outcome with the client. So when evaluating the success of the solution, what are the key metrics or KPIs? What do we focus on with the businesses?
Yeah, I think if you look at that, if you look at the aspect of it, and these are very, very complicated environments we work in. Right now, it's a manufacturing floor. It's really in concept, not much different than how they used to make Ford Model Ts back in the 20s. It's a production line, but it's obviously much, much more sophisticated. The intricacy of everything that goes into that is huge, right? And so a lot of what we do in those kind of, we're looking at, again, the basics of the safety, building that into the culture. That's an expectation. The quality aspect, making sure that technicians know that we stop and we make sure that if something doesn't feel safe or something doesn't look right from a quality standpoint, we stop and escalate, right? We don't want to put product or lives in any sort of jeopardy. The other part of it is, again, like I spoke about a little bit ago, is utilization of the technicians and showing that we're basically tracking exactly how they're utilized. We've got a nice little app that we can load on smartphones that can track that and build that database very quickly. And it shows that we're able to go and adjust workflow if necessary to make sure that we have that. Or like I said before, is there cross-training opportunities where these technicians can do other things to make them a fully utilized source for the employee? Those are huge from a tracking standpoint. Like I talked about a little bit ago, the A3 problem solving, again, we look at how we can go and look at any sort of issues or anything else that's going on and how we can help sort of engineer those out and help the client or the customer in this case build better systems.
I love the app that you just referenced about building. I know a number of companies would love to have that level of transparency to what their technicians are focused on in any given hour or minute. And speaking of those types of values, would love to hear you talk about a success story
Sure.
where you've helped a semiconductor client overcome maybe a significant workforce challenge.
Sure, absolutely. I think I'll use a very recent one. We've got several, but a very recent one because it's very large in scale. It was a small, what I'll call a small metro market where we do have one of the largest clients in the United States, that factory from a fab standpoint, fabrication factory. And they were going through a massive ramp. And this just took place in the beginning of 2024 all the way through 2024. It started before that. They were really looking at how they could hire internal and hire their own people, but we're not doing it very successfully. Again, most of these clients are not set up they don't have the recruiting machine, the hiring machine. It's usually you pull their existing workforce to go and do these interview pools, the hiring, the recruiting, all that kind of stuff. So they have to step away from their primary role to go and support this. And then they're constantly rotating people in there. And so it just sets up for not a great experience. Now, the amount of technicians I'm talking about this client needed to hire was almost 800. And again, this is a small metro environment. This is substantial. So they finally said, okay, listen, we need your help in doing this. We're going to increase the ratio of, of the contingent workforce on the site because we need this. We've seen your demonstrated, execution. And so we were able to go at the beginning of 2024 with a population of little less than 200 and ramp that to October. We had 800 employees on site. Now, these were already people that were in the program that were actually helping run this factory. And there was multiple factories on the site, but helping run it and basically build these systems. And we had, again, we're able to transfer managers from other sites to go. So we give experienced technical managers in this environment and build up to this ramp very quickly. That's a lot of hiring, a lot of interviewing, a lot of everything else that needs to happen, onboarding, everything else that goes into this. But we were able to meet the demand within the timelines that the customer, in fact, we beat the actual timelines, but it was huge. Again, this was a smaller metro environment. And again, it was a proof of concept for a lot of what we had already been doing, but on a larger scale. It was a great win for us, a fantastic win for us. And also a huge win for the client because now they're currently looking at, they've already started hiring some of those technicians from us for their own spots. And so we're starting to feed that into that. But again, that was probably one of the biggest success stories we've had in the last, let's call it a year. That was a big one.
It sounds like a great collaboration between Kelly and that client. It's a great example. Thank you. So looking ahead, when we're talking about the semiconductor space, what trends do you see shaping the future of workforce solutions and how is Kelly preparing them?
Sure. I think, there's a lot of talk out there of AI and what it's going to take away potentially versus what it's going to add. But if you look at, again, what we're doing, and there's going to be portions and pieces of that built into this, but a lot of what we're doing is, again, technicians. These are hands-on people that are in there either running the factory floor, right? Via process type technicians, things like that, or doing maintenance on these tools. That kind of work is not going away anytime soon. And again, what you're also seeing is this is branching out just outside of semiconductor, right? I mean, what we're doing, preparing these technicians for, we're already starting to see a lot of medical device companies, EV makers, the green energy initiative, right? Whether it be wind turbines, solar type stuff. These companies are looking for these employees to place within their own organizations because they have strong problem-solving skill set. They understand the computer interface and how that runs the bigger things, whether it be just looking at like defects on wafers to actually running a segment of the production line. These things translate very well across other industries. And you're starting to see everything. We had an employer just recently in the state that I'm in build a plant that builds, and it's a large maker of plumbing supplies that go in homes and stuff like that. Well, this new site basically built in a lot of what they consider advanced manufacturing. And so they started looking at some of the semiconductors, who they could snipe, hire from to fill these positions. So when you start seeing that happen, you realize, listen, you're onto something. This is bigger than just the semiconductor space, but we're basically helping young talent write a career resume. And that's probably the biggest, in my personal piece, biggest win for me is because you're seeing these young adults, not necessarily always young adults, but come into something new and build into where we can internally pipeline in because we have programs that will internal to us that will build them into obviously level 2s, level 3s, or into FSC type positions, but also management positions, right? How do we get that technical leader and build a manager skill set around them so they can do even more and help the future workforce? Is there opportunity maybe for them at another site we can transfer them to if they want to? It's that kind of storyline that makes you not want to quit, makes you want to keep going ahead because the opportunities are huge out there. And I think it's only going to get bigger. I think that, what we're able to provide, it helps a lot of customers bridge I'll call it their non-expertise in this space because they're not recruiters, they're not hiring, they're not, the amount of people they would have to put into that role. is not feasible for them. So letting us take that burden is huge. Again, the sky's the limit right now. And the workforce exists. It's just a matter of finding them, getting them that experience, bringing them in, nurturing it, and then letting them run with it. And really, that's what it boils down to.
And it sounds like you're building it, which is equally rewarding. Craig, I really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks so much for your time today. So that's it for this episode of The Workforce Advantage. Thanks again to our guest, Craig Walters, for sharing his valuable insights on how Kelly is driving semiconductor growth with skilled technical talent. I'd also like to thank our audience for listening in. Don't forget to subscribe to the show so you don't miss the next episode. I'm Tim Dupree, and until next time, stay ahead of the curve and make your workforce work for you.